common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
John Solomon. John, talk about what Liz Cheney did behind a lot of people's backs.
Well, it's an amazing story. We knew a year ago that she put on this testimony by Cassidy Hutchinson, the star of the Democrats' J6 hearings, that said the president tried to grab the wheel and commandeer his limousine and take it to the Capitol on January 6th. At the time they presented that testimony, Liz Cheney and the committee knew it wasn't true. They had already been told by the Secret Service it wasn't true. Now we know something more.
Wow.
Yeah, think about that. There was a lie told in Washington, and there's gambling in casinos. How about that?
I'm shocked. There's gambling in casinos?
Yes, exactly. Well, now here's another one. Not only did that not follow the normal rules of congressional investigation, which is you get all sides and then you tell the public what you found, Liz Cheney reached out to that witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, behind her lawyer's back and tried to get her to come in and do a third interview, the interview where she reveals that story. And she did it even though, as a lawyer in Washington, D.C., she's a licensed lawyer in D.C., Liz Cheney is, she had an obligation to go through her lawyer. We all know what it means to lawyer up, which means we get a lawyer. That means government institutions from that point forward must deal with our lawyer, not come to us, not try to intimidate us, influence us, change our mind about something. Liz Cheney didn't abide by those attorney-client privilege rules that we all follow in Washington. We follow across the country. She went behind the back. She used an encrypted app, started talking to Cassidy Hutchinson and her friends around the lawyer, and eventually would go and help her get new lawyers. So she not only goes around the lawyer, she helps replace the lawyer, which leads to the testimony that gave us that story that turned out to be totally bogus.
So, John, it's Richard Weinberg. Why is that not witness tampering?
That's a great question. That is a very good question. It certainly is a conduct that isn't allowed by D.C. lawyers. It's certainly conduct that's probably going to bring shame or bad news or bad judgment to the Congress, which is one of the ethics rules. You're not supposed to take any actions. We'll see if Mike Johnson, who hasn't been too big on policing any of the conduct in Congress, whether he'll take this on. But it is an extraordinary thing. And there's one last question to think about. All right, we now know she went around and talked to the lawyers, Liz Cheney, went around the lawyers, talked to the witness directly. We know from Cassidy Hutchinson's book, she got Cassidy Hutchinson new lawyers. That's very rare. When you're interviewing someone, you don't go get them their lawyers. What if Congress were to ask the question, did Liz Cheney or her lawyers have anything to do with getting Cassidy Hutchinson her book deal? If the book deal is somehow connected to these other conversations, Congress is going to have a big scandal on its hands.
Well, no,
if
the Republican Congress doesn't win, right, guess what?
It all gets buried.
Everything gets buried.
You're right. It'll be 10 feet under. Yep.
Sadly. You know what? I'm also remembering, John, that at this time, because everybody was covering the whole J6 hearings wall to wall, yep, the Secret Service guys, some of them were available and wanted to talk, but they were not allowed to speak. And now we know why, because maybe they clearly would have refuted what Liz Cheney knew.
It did not fit with their narrative.
Exactly. How disgusting is that?
That's right. Congress is supposed to give the facts and then develop the narrative. In this case, the narrative was developed, and then they tried to shoehorn facts to keep that narrative. And as a result, we've all been misled. Not only about January 6th. This is a pattern we saw in Russia collusion, that we saw in Ukraine impeachment, with Hunter Biden's laptop. Over the last 8 years, both the Democrats, the federal bureaucrats that work with them, and the traditional media that always buy their narrative, they've misled the public time and again. We've been through so many crises that weren't crises after all.
Yeah, that's amazing. Judge Weinberg.
John, I want to ask you about, you had this great little blog, which I thought was very interesting. So Kamala Harris can't go out there and really have a conversation, give a speech without the teleprompter. So she's brought in the surrogates. She's brought in Biden, who's not been particularly helpful. She's brought in Clinton, Obama. What are your thoughts about that? How's that working out for her?
Well, yeah, it's those big three surrogates, which I think a lot of people thought, boy, that's going to close the deal for Kamala Harris. They've blown up the deal for Kamala Harris. Bill Clinton goes out and says Laken Riley, goes to Georgia and says Laken Riley, the young college student who died in Georgia at the hands of an illegal immigrant, would be alive if this administration had done a better job vetting immigrants at the border. That's a direct attack on Kamala Harris. And by the way, Bill Clinton doesn't make mistakes like that. The media called that a gaffe. It's not a gaffe. He intended to say what he said.
He's one smart guy.
He is. He doesn't make mistakes.
By
like
the
that.
way,
There's no doubt about
on
it.
the interview I did with him last October,
Right.
You know what he said about border controls?
Yep. He believed in a strong border, and it's pretty remarkable. They have that. Then you've got President Barack Obama who goes out and say, hey, black guys, if you're not voting for Kamala Harris, you're not a black guy. That has created an incredible boomerang against the former president and against Kamala Harris. She's been on defense on that one. And then Joe Biden decided to call a press conference at the same moment Kamala Harris was going to do an event, kind of overshadowed her event. And he basically said, Kamala Harris loves me. She's been behind every one of the decisions she's been distancing herself from. Three guys really got even with Kamala Harris, or if they didn't get even, they certainly put a wrench in her plans to use these surrogates.
Yeah, exactly. You just play that over and over.
If you remember our conversation, WABC, we said it first here when President Biden did not push forward the port strike under Taft-Hartley,
You said
and
it.
waited days and days and days, even though he's a Democratic president.
Yeah, no, that was interesting. And you said, look, maybe he's trying to put a little bit of a shiv in Kamala's. And it looks like by the way, it looks like it's also publicly confirmed too now that there's this disparate views clearly and competition. Rudy.
Well, John, what I wanted to say, and I've said it in talking amongst ourselves, there's no accountability. And we keep letting them do this, and we don't have a fair press anymore. And if this goes on, this will happen to every Republican nominee. Will be destroyed by this media.
Wait! What did Governor Newsom do, John Solomon in California?
Well, yeah, he's funding the news media. He's so embraced the news media, he wants to send them hundreds of millions of dollars.
No, didn't he sign an executive order?
Yeah, banning where essentially you don't have to show ID.
You imagine that? How are you going to have, John, how are you going to have integrity of elections unless you can check the IDs?
Yeah, and then you have DOJ suing Virginia.
They'll move in another million migrants from there and give them voters cards.
Exactly. And they're fighting them. Anybody who's trying to clean up the rolls, they're fighting them.
So one of the most corrupt members of the House who ran the whole impeachment nonsense, Adam Schiff, who's running for the Senate. So he'll need a few 100,000 more votes. No problem. Open the border another few hours.
It is a real issue. And you know what? The American people understand it now. They get what's going on. That's why they've turned on this issue so powerfully in the last few months. When you look at the polls, they're really upset. They really support voter ID. They can't understand why it's going on. This election is the election where Americans can create that accountability by making a change. If they don't, I've said this since Russia collusion. Once all the people that were involved in Russia collusion didn't get any real accountability, the temptation to keep cheating in politics would get greater and greater and using the government to create political, and it's happening.
And that's why they're afraid to allow President Trump to become president, because he's going to hold those people accountable.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's certainly their big fear.
John Solomon, thank you for telling the truth, and we'll catch up with you again real soon.
Sounds great. Great to be with all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.